Well, here, seeing we're sort of 4 minutes late on Eugene time, and please.
Okay. This is Mortensrud Church, and
Talk a little louder.
Sorry.
Wait, that's okay. Yeah,
Okay.
that's just in the recorder, but speak up.
okay, this is Mortensrud Church, and it's located in Oslo, Norway, and it was completed in 2002. And the budget actually seems like quite a bit, but it's equivalent to social housing in Norway. So it was actually done on a very tight budget, which I found out.
Yeah.
Here, I'll go to the next image. It's located on kind of a hill that's mostly rock, and they did very little. They did no blasting. They were very cautious of the environment and just scraped away a few layers of dirt. This quote actually talks a lot about the structure and how it's actually the sheer walls are created out of the stone that then ties into the steel plates.
Okay.
Let's see. Also, I guess the steel plates that are inserted between the glass are acting also as shear that you
Right.
can see in that one image.
Okay.
Here's the interior
cool.
of the church. The stone's dry stacked, and then on the back and the sides of the nave, they create openings. The smaller image is the shot of the back of the nave, and then there's a section through it. Here's some more side details, and let's see.
That's it.
And there's one more.
One more.
And then here's some outer facades. This is actually the back kind of supporting building has the smaller sanctuary and like the little kitchen and the restrooms in this building. And then the other image is the main sanctuary again.
So cool. This was your base material one, talking about stone.
Yes.
And did I suggest that you do the Dominus Winery?
No.
What did I give you as your project?
St. Lawrence.
What?
St. Mark's and St.
Right, Clippen, those
Yes.
things, right. And now that I understand the whole building, and hopefully you've learned something from looking at those, but why don't you just do Leverance
Okay.
at Clippen, and then talk about the Dominus Winery by Herzog Demeron in Napa.
Okay.
Okay, because this building, what's interesting in seeing it right now, she picked the very best image to show us, and that's what often happens in a journal. And for me, seeing the whole journey here, I don't see mastery, I see youthful exuberance without enough editing. Okay, so it looks like a lot of the projects that we see in studio or we see in our own studios as we at our early phase. These are young men or women, obviously going somewhere, but they didn't have the discipline to edit. And I think what will be interesting for you is to look at the mature Herzog Demeron with their Gabion-inspired winery, playing with similar issues, really paring it down. I think you're going to see an interesting contrast between this and the winery, based on similar principles of transparency in stone and dematerializing stone. That's interesting. Well, thank you for sharing this. It's really great. So. Jensen and Skodivid, so Skodivid, I guess. Okay. Be curious to see, but you really, I can see totally, this whole thing was a pleasant surprise, but I think what you saw as you got beyond that, they were sort of tripping on themselves with the whole idea of where they were going. It got overly complex, overly fussy, and it just doesn't have the maturity that you'll find in Leverett or Clippen nor the other project. So, the last formal presentation, and I'm going to try to go through this idea of the spaces in between, looking at architecture beyond buildings. And as I've chosen throughout this seminar, is to talk about work that I know intimately. It's work that I've created. because I think that's the most direct insight you're ever going to get. I can theorize about somebody else's work, I can rag on about it, I can talk about it, but who knows if I'm getting it right or wrong. And I believe that there's things that I can share with you from these journeys that hopefully will, at least they're on a direct telling. They're not filtered in any way. When we talk about the spaces in between and the idea of making community, I think we've talked a little bit about how fragile architecture is. It's the most fragile art form as far as how it can be changed, how it can be altered by both clients, by time, by aging, much different than other formal art that we see in galleries. And to emphasize the fragility of the concept of this, we're looking at a photograph of two cities of the 20th century in this picture. Two cities are being shown here. On the left, we have the city of 8,000 people in 1929. It's a city called 29 Skidoo. It's a city that overlooks a city, large town, 8,000 people, 1929. That was starting to be a city. It was prosperous. It was overlooking Death Valley, California. And in 1996, all that remained of that city of 9,000 people, barely 60 years from the date of its founding, is some tin can shards, some paths through the desert, a few foundation markings, and nothing else. It was active, it was prosperous, it was on the mineral wealth of mining of Death Valley, and 8,000 people lived there, went to church there, went to school there. There was a bar and a brothel. There were 8,000 people active in that city. Their town. There's nothing there right now. So it's very, very fragile what we create, and nature will take it back. On the right is the city of Barcelona, Spain. That shows you the vitality of a living city that is ongoing. It's profound, it's there. And in that image on the upper right, where you can see the corner of water, that's the Mediterranean. And what you're seeing in the densification of that area is the medieval sector of Barcelona, Spain. And medieval cities are quite amazing to discover scale and mystery and magic outside the grid. But what happens in Barcelona is in the modern age of the mid-19th century, a man named Cerda, C-E-R-D-A, did what's called the Cerda Plan, which is this gridded city, almost at the scale of Portland, but a little bit bigger. But at each juncture of the corners of the grid are these rotated 45-degree corners that make these amazing almost piazzas at every corner of the grid that scale the city, and it's a city made of courtyards wrapped by these donut plans, old and new meeting together in a city that gets more vibrant and more vibrant every day. The spaces in between. Today we talk about zoning and CC&Rs and design review and all kinds of rules to protect us and our environment, somewhat of a post-World War II phenomenon. But we're so worried about what the other guy will do and how he mess up our environment and our cities. And we're NIMBY'd and over-controlled to the max. On the left, you're looking at St. Mark's Square. You're looking at St. Mark's Cathedral. The Doge's Palace is to the right. We're standing almost in the shadow of the Campanelli, which is the tall tower that was erected, I think, in the 17th century. We have the arcade. We have this amazing public space, one of the great memorable spaces of all time, crafted without rules over hundreds of years, by the rules being the sensibilities of the architects and the patrons and the citizens of this place to allow difference and change. When you look at the different styles, the different sort of collisions, they don't become collisions, they become complements and extensions. Great space you'll find often in your travels of life happen because of that energy. And as professionals, I think all of you have to strive when you're practicing architecture, when you're becoming part of planning and community, to be positive influences to go beyond just the rules. Today, sometimes the rules are good because without rules, we wouldn't know what to break and what to challenge. But every rule is able to be challenged. Every rule is able, and you can't know how to really go somewhere often without the boundaries of rules. But look at the magic that happens when you just have a civility about, people and artists and architects. On the right, you have an interesting juxtaposition of the spaces in between, which talks about old and new, obviously. On the right is the new, not old, Gothic buildings of Yale University. Okay, that's the original campus with the church tower and things, and we know that does not extend back to the 14th century or to Romanesque or to the first Gothic architecture that the world knew in Europe, but it's a invented campus that was invented in the 17 and 1800s in New Haven, Connecticut. And there is a combination of a contemporary city along with this sort of neo-Gothic environment. And isn't it amazing when you put somebody with the talent and vision and ability of Lou Kahn into that environment, how he creates this timeless building on the left with its concrete frame, with its carefully crafted and executed details and choices of materiality. And I feel a certain sense of total compatibility in a quiet way between this environment. It's 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but equals much more. Maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 2 squared, I don't know. But again, this is something that we have to carry with us as we work in part of the fabric of a city, the spaces in between. And what will amaze you is that while often historic preservation groups and NIMBYs, which are abound, sort of really want that other thing, that comfortable thing. They don't want to be challenged. The SHPOs of the states of the Union, SHPO meaning State Historic Preservation Officer, okay, the SHPOs, really recognize that you compromise history by trying to imitate it. And that in most places where educated people in archaeology and history and cultural relevance govern the laws of historic preservation, there's an increasing movement to acknowledge carefully and make marriages between old and new. Right now we're doing an elevator cab in the historic 1900 state capitol of Arizona, Territorial State House. And meeting with the SHPO, as I expect it would be the case, because the elevator wasn't part, obviously, of the 1900 capitol. It was an addition in the 1920s and 30s, and it has in front of it some light fixtures from Home Depot, believe it or not. That was somebody's way to get at the look of a crystalline gas lamp. Home Depot, if you will, in the preservation and restoration of the Arizona State 1900 Capitol. But what Bob Frankeberger and Jim Garrison told me is make the elevator quiet and respectful. And in this cast iron 1900 building, we have created a vessel of translucent reflection and light with an ingrained wood floor that talks to the ceramic floor beyond. That's a capsule of simplicity that will go up and down to serve the functions of the old Capitol in the 21st century. These spaces in between can be the quiet things we discover all by ourselves on an early morning, walking the back streets of a great city like Prague, Czechoslovakia, that you see on the left. Not a person there, but every indication of time and age, a poetry, a time for reflection and discovery that is good empty as it is filled with people. On the right, the spaces in between become the contemporary reinvention of what are called the East Islands of Amsterdam. And those 3 islands that you see there were where the wealth, where the immigrants, where the power of warships sailed from Amsterdam and Netherlands for hundreds of years. And as we looked at the contemporary day and the size of shipping vessels and container transportation and the dangers of gas tankers and gasoline tankers, and would you want them into the city this close? This is a kilometer from the railroad station at the heart of Old Amsterdam. They moved the harbor farther out to the sea, and over the course of 25 years, they created a contemporary, mixed-use living environment of houses within a kilometer of downtown Amsterdam called the East Islands that are an amazing model for how you can live. And they're a place that I strongly suggest you try to do research on. Between landscape and architecture and urban planning, there is no finer example that you can use in your lives at this point in time as you go forward and work in places, start working in communities as a point of reference of great imagination. this island here, Borneo, where I had my honeymoon not too long ago. This street right here, see all these little different dashes? That's about 80 different lots that are the typical module of Amsterdam that is about not much more than 14 to 16 feet wide. Every one of these dashes is by a different architect. There was a boundary, there was a call to 60 different architects, each to do a house. Some with clients, some without clients. And right at this joint here, this wonderful little piazza that's midpoint between these bridges here and the wonderful red bridge here, Enrique Marias from Spain was given a 6-place condo to do at that juncture. And it's profound when you look at it. I did not know that the East Islands existed when I conceived this project in Tempe, Arizona, a mixed-use housing project on a long, skinny lot for a young woman who is a developer from Victoria, British Columbia. And I asked her she asked to maximize the return on her investment of how many units I could get. And in this linear fashion, we created this different sort of housing on the edge of a 60s ranch house subdivision near the university. And here you can see an elevation, the conversation between these normative houses that you see here, one-story ranch burgers, and University Drive, a mile from ASU. We ask for, in our design, we did what was logical, what made sense. We looked at the rules, we looked at logic. In this particular instance, both of us were naive, my client, Nicole Roberts, and ourselves. And in our exuberance with community meetings and meetings with officials, we decided this was worth presenting as an idea. And when it was finally analyzed with the planning officials, we had 8 violations of planning. We appealed all 11. We won all 11. The city has now changed their planning documents that none of what we ask for will have to be asked for by the next architect. Now that's pretty crazy. A new client, a tight budget, but this idea we had about making community. You can see how the buildings at the height here step down naturally to this point here. We have 2 stories above garages and carriage houses. We, by the developer's concession, we're allowed to put underground parking with its expense under half the site. But we got 3 times as many units as anybody would think. We got the ability for nobody walks more than 2 levels to their front door, so there are no elevators in the project. Question?
Yeah, can I ask you to elaborate a little bit about what the violations were?
Setbacks, taking lanes, building close to the street, live work, overhanging a public way, back alleyways, the garages, access points, a bunch of things. But that was the nature of it, stuff that you would see. Not too much with material choices. We didn't even have that discussion because it was just all by the standards of the community. But now this is a parking lane. There was no parking on the street. We got them to eliminate a traffic lane and allow parking on the street to increase the vitality in the urbans. It was a calming factor when they were trying to figure out how to calm this busy street on the edge of the campus. We suggest you park here. They now have rezoned that whole street to allow for on-street parking with future developments. And quite frankly, we had numerous public meetings. We went through a whole review and voting process with the Planning Commission. It's still reflecting back now, how the hell did that happen? We didn't get shot down on one. This is crazy stuff, right? So this became an environment, and what's really intriguing is these are the projections and renderings, and that's the reality. And what you're looking at is courtyard living, and in Phoenix, typically at most, there's a lot of empty land. You have 1,600 people living per square mile. In Queens or Brooklyn, you have 35 to 40,000 people living per square mile. This project that you're looking at is what that looks like. That's if we had spread this project with its courtyard density, no more than 4 levels with 2 levels and a 2-story townhouse on top, carriage houses, the kind of density you see here, with the mixed use and the commercial, spaces in between, the reality in between. That's what's the scary thing of that dirty word that we talk about, density in a community. People really living too dense. Not one man, 1 acre, one family, 1 acre, but real urbanism. That's how scary it looks, folks. That's the density of Brooklyn you're looking at. And in Phoenix, Arizona, where we just opened our first light rail at 25 miles, I did a studio at the university with the former dean, and we determined that if at every one of the 25 stops on the light rail trail in the transit area development, you took 1 mile circle, at this density, you would add it basically over 1 million people to the city with minimal impact to any infrastructure and eliminating the sprawl and increasing the efficiency of the quality of life. 1 million people by just building these sort of structures, and if they were a little higher and denser, which would be very easy. We look at the Pearl in Portland, we know that can be really cool and very livable. So those are the challenges we face. And it was interesting because the conversation to this day is about color in this building, because when they saw the pungently optimistic green flash on the buildings, and you can see in these images it was fairly dominant, the color name was coined, and I'll share that with you in a second with the next project, but the color is of controversy because everybody has an opinion about color. So Nicole Roberts, my developer, is sitting at a fundraiser, a civic event with the dean of the School of Architecture and the most powerful zoning attorney in the city, waiting for the rubber chicken to be served, listening to them argue about the color. They liked it, they didn't like it, it was cool, how can you do it, what's it all about? Nicole finally said, well, you're talking about my project, and I'm sold out, and that's good to have a conversation. And they just all laughed. And some people in Tempe on the council are afraid to let Will Bruder ever practice in town again because they think that Will Bruder means green, because they can't think beyond that issue. In the midst of doing the Vale, which is the project I just shared with you in Tempe, Arizona, the same developer was brought to this little red rectangle in Scottsdale, Arizona, unbuilt, little site that we have here, not particularly exciting or attractive. We have a Bible store on the left, and we have a antiquity store in the little yellow tile roofed house on the right. And the question was that it looked like a real buy, but could you really make it pencil by getting more than 3 living units in this live-work zoning? So it was commercial downtown zoning. You could live on the site, so it had this live over the workplace zoning. This is what no request looked like. So in one town we asked for 11. In this town, to make it efficient, we didn't want to fight the extra 6 months of those sort of changes. We had to operate quickly at the velocity of the project. And as I stood on this lot, and in this composite, the vertical image on the left is what I saw as I spun around on the lot, I realized that this silly little leftover in the fabric of the city had the most precious view by value of the valley. That is Camelback Mountain. It is looking northwest directly at the worst summer sun, but it was the privilege of this property to have that view to Camelback Mountain. This was a townhouse project, condo project, live work as I mentioned. It was built for $120 a square foot. The units were sold for approximately $340,000 per unit. There are 5 units. There are 3 people that live here with small office spaces for some. There's a psychotherapist, psychological therapist, okay, not psychotherapist, that lives in unit number 2. There is an artist living in unit number 3. Number 4 is a headhunter that uses the entire structure for his offices. And level 5 is a realtor that deals in contemporary properties that uses the entire structure for their offices. In unit number 1, an architect and his art consultant wife live, me. I did not know I was going to live here when I designed the building, and I think I mentioned that possibly when I showed this earlier in the lecture, but the sawtooth is about the privilege of that view that the space reaches beyond. It was built by the city's, under the city's green building program, which is not a LEED rating, but a way that the developer would get special attention through building review, so they bought into it. It was by green standards of more insulation, shading, all the things that make a good green building. There was not the money for commissioning that fit into the pro forma of this small unit to make it LEED, but it's not about counting points, it's about the reality really of a living building. And so we moved forward. We went through the most arduous design review known to man, which is the DRB of the city of Scottsdale, which has made the town one of the most boring cities in America, because everything that they approve is sort of right down the middle. It's not really bad, and most of the time it's not really good. It's generally beige, and they spend hours arguing about color trim on Denny's restaurants, when more important issues are at hand. We submitted the drawings for this project to the city. We met every criteria of a 14-page checklist. Yes, okay, yes. And you always go to those meetings with great knot in your stomach almost, right? And Nicole and I go to the meeting, you're sitting there, and every page turns, you're sitting with your project manager, you know, your caseworker, turning the pages, right? Everything's cool, cool, cool. At the end, where there's several lines left over for other comments, literally written in fairly large letters was, how the hell does this fit into Scottsdale, Arizona? Okay, that was exactly a quote. We have the pre-review, as is common in the spaces in between of our cities when you're working as an architect. And what I have found the best policy to be is, in cases like this, you don't ask to be put on the active agenda at the first time you can get there. You ask to be put on a work agenda. It is a public forum, but not a public discussion. It is previewing what next meetings will be about. You ask for a preview. Because nobody likes to get something and be put on the spot in public. Just think about it. Any of you in this room, you don't want me to walk in today and show you something and have you speak at the library or at the student union in an hour, or be in the student union and be given that material, even give the hour. It's not human nature. So I made a presentation based on the comments that I read on that last page. And when I went to the work session, I had prepared two 30 by 40 boards where two small prints, 5 by 7, little, not even, 3 by 5 photograph prints from the printed company place had been printed of my models. And surrounding them were 200 images of buildings in context that were rusty, that were contemporary, that were angular, that were artful, reaching past the boundaries of Scottsdale a little bit beyond that 1 mile circle to Taliesin West. So Taliesin West is in Scottsdale, Arizona. It wasn't when it was built, but it is now, and they proudly flaunt it as their trophy. Paul Oslari's studio, which was just across the border. But I proved the case, and you couldn't even see my buildings. That was part of my conversation. And at the next meeting I went to, we went to a 9-0 unanimous vote, Xing out the comment of what the hell does this have to do with the city, and winning the day in building this building, which has become a marker throughout the world of progressive thinking in Scottsdale, Arizona. And it's interesting because with all the rules, that little yellow building on the right, well, okay, let's back up a second. So I passed all the things. You submit your material sample board, you go in the file, it's part of your building permit and all this stuff, right? So fast forward a year and a half. The building contractor calls for final inspection. And along with final inspection comes the building inspector to give you your green tag or your red tag. And in this case, she had her file, and she opened up her DRB file with all these samples and pictures. And suddenly, and let me see if you can't even see it here. But, okay, right? Okay, this gives you the point. See this right here? That little soffit? There's a little head on a window right here. Maybe I show it, maybe I don't here. I should. Because during a value engineering thing, the full-height sliding doors at the, oops, it's not there. The full-height sliding doors at the facade along behind the block wall had to go standard. It's 7.0 for cost. So I have 2 foot of a band suddenly of plaster that wasn't in the DRB submittal. And because you couldn't see it, just like here, and the outside world couldn't really see it, I picked a color. And that was similar to that green you saw a second ago. And there it is, green. And you see a little bit of it above on the roof of these sidewalls. That's all you can see. We're busted. we get a red tag because we had violated what we agreed to do. They didn't really care. It had to go back to DRB. I thought everything was really hunky-dory. We'd be able to talk it through. It was only logical, it was only rational. You couldn't really see it. And I guess by quirk of good fate sometimes, I was out of town and one of my partners went to DRB for the rehearing. Well, they wanted blood because they thought it was just me being attitudinal, being arrogant, and shoving it in their face, and I was always going to do it anyway, and that's me just being me, right? And we carry baggage, whether it's true or not, with our personas, okay? But somehow the discussion raged. We almost got thrown out totally where we have to start over totally. And fortunately, 2 architects on the design review panel who do know me said, why don't we delay this, move it forward to the next meeting when Will can be here? Because they really wanted me, okay? It wasn't about color, it was about the attitude in the system. So I did a little politicking with the city manager and all the people that were on the panel. I talked to them personally with great apologies. I literally, metaphorically, crawled into council chambers where the next meeting was 3 weeks later. I gave them the whip. I took off my shirt. I let them start flogging me. No, just that's extreme, but that was what needed to happen. I mean, the first thing was that absurdity. And then the chairman, who normally the chairman of this committee is the city councilor, and Wayne Acton looked at me and he said, Mr. Bruder, what is that color? So all 5 homeowners are here. They're anxious to move into their house that they can't move in because they don't have a green tag. You know, my soon-to-be wife is sitting there because that's another story. Everybody's sitting there. They're all anxious for the get it over with. The developers sort of, I'm going to pay the nickel. I'm going to repaint it. It's not going to be her problem because I broke the rules. And when Councilman Acton looked at me and said, what is the color? Unthinkingly, I just said, it is pungently optimistic green. 9 people laughed. The 9 people sitting at the councilor's table that were the design review committee. At that point, I knew I had a 9-0 vote and it was over for me. They would not be laughing if they were going to trash me. So, with humor and what is pungently optimistic green, Mr. Bruder? It is optimistic, like the color of spring that we see outside the window. And it is optimistic like the hot guacamole salsas and hot sauces that we eat with our food in the Southwest. Pungently optimistic green. Okay, at that point, okay, it was on Councilman Acton's lips, what color will you make it if we don't allow it to be that color? I'm about to answer when the staff rises up next to me from the city. We will take care of that with Mr. Bruder. You know, we'll bring it back to you. And he just said, no, that's okay, you know, and it wasn't there. Had I been able to say, because I was thinking quickly, because I hadn't even thought what other color it could be, because it really couldn't be any other color. The color I would have told him, probably confusing him more and still resulting in a debate because it would have been too bright, was white. To pick anything out of the purple-red range would have not worked with the rust. To pick anything in the red-orange thing would have canceled itself out with the rust. So rather than another color, it would be the lack of color white that would have been the right answer to talk to the school across the street, which you saw on the one slide. Quite frankly, I sat down after the 9-0 vote, very happy. It happened like that. As I sat down next to my to-be wife, Louise, I said, why did they laugh at me? Because I had no idea. It wasn't even my space, you know? I mean, you're in this clutch situation, you're playing for the Super Bowl, you know, it's 2 seconds left and you're getting ready to throw it and there's no time left, and you just throw up a 3-pointer, right? I mean, it's just what you do in life. That's what you all will have the opportunity to be as architects, the guy and gal that knows what to do in those things. So here we have La Loma 5. Journey through the gateway. About the same time that this is going on, a project came up for 11 acres at the corner of Mill and University at the entry to ASU's campus. It was a request for a developer to put together a team and a design effort to win a competition to build the new Arts and Business Gateway at Arizona State University. The minute I heard about it, which was somewhat late to the fact, I knew I wanted to play. And I knew that the 11 acres with 4 major colleges, mixed use, housing, a hotel, all these things in the general outline of what might be there, Cities aren't made by individuals, so how do I put together a team? The first person I called was Andy Bowes at Norman Foster's office, who I knew Andy from back in New Zealand, a conference, and we became great sort of friends. And I invited Norman Foster to come to our party, and he said yes. The next call I placed was to Stefan Banish, whose father I'd met and whose work I knew. And he was driving through the Black Forest of Germany, got him on his cell phone, tooling through in his Porsche. I invited Stefan Banish to the game, and that's the image on the upper right, which is the Genzyme building, which I happen to report, very happy to report, had a surprise visit with last night because he is one of 4 finalists for the new sustainability living building that is being proposed in Portland. When I walked in council chambers last night, after leaving here yesterday morning as part of my normal day yesterday, to hear the presentations, I was pleasantly shocked and surprised that of the 4 candidates, 3 people that will count numbers for leads, 1 person that has the vision to make something happen, is a contender for this amazing thing. Because this will be a building that I see from my home in Portland, looking across towards PSU from the 19th floor of the Harrison. So Stefan Banish, a man, as we know, that it's not about green and points and lead, it's about a vision of how we change, how we build and occupy the world, and Genzyme is a great thing. He said yes. Lower right is Christy Tanaik, great landscape architect from the Southwest, and she was a local. Myself with the portfolio of Central Library, and for a while we had Ken Yang in there from Indonesia, but that was making the puzzle a little too complicated, and so we knew when to say when. Then I had to, because I didn't have the developer, and it was a developer's game. As I looked at the meeting list of the meeting I did not go to because I didn't know the project was real yet, I saw 4 pages of names of developers and architects and consultants. And I saw 1 name I recognized on the list, a bunch of other names, and it was a person that had called me once just as a favor to talk about doing something. And I called him up, and I asked, can you tell me, please, Ethan, who are the firms I should consider calling that would be good for me on this list because I respect you and you know what these people are about? Well, he gave me the name of Concord Eastridge, which is the name you saw right there. That's the developer. I went to them, instantly called Susan Eastridge, the head of the company. She was the first female president of the student body of ASU in the 80s. She's the ultimate cheerleader for her school, and she's a very successful developer. And I presented the case, and in this meeting suddenly with a whole bunch of people that I knew and didn't know, I was sitting there trying to pitch my case, and yet said I have a team, but I don't know who I'm going with, so you just have to trust me. I got the best team out there. And I interviewed them. It then took a week for me to sort out with some other developers that I wanted to go with the Concord Eastridge people. And it was very interesting because during the discussion of strategies that we had in this room, they were all sharing what rumors they had heard of who had who. And I was told that somebody else had Norman Foster. And I had to do everything I could to keep a straight poker face and not give up the fact that I really friggin' had him. And that was a bad rumor because I knew I had him and they didn't. But it was an interesting time. We, over the course of 4 months, pursued this RFP, and we created what you see here. During that course, we went to London twice. We went to the mountain, if you will. That's Norman there and myself working at his round table. He worked on the project briefly, but he was traveling a lot, as he always did. That's Andy Bowes sitting next to my standing there on the slide on the right. And you can see all the people at the round table and the guy in the orange shirt. That's Janssen, Christoph Janssen, who I was with Stefan last night. That's Banish there in the suit, just like he looked in the council chambers in Portland above the guy in the orange shirt in the lower slide. And we're working ideas because this was a competition that was about image. This is our activities that you see happening as this project is evolving. And this is the site, getting to the special subject. And we had the finest team you could ever friggin' imagine, and it was a blast. This was on our nickel. The only thing we got the developer to concede to pay was expenses. So all the airfares, all the lodging, all the trips to back and forth between Europe and here. And at one point, Foster came to us, so we had 1 workshop in the desert. We had 2 in London. We had one in Venice where the other Danish studio is with Christoph. And we proceeded in less than 4 months to generate what you're about to see. We had a person that was about these easy lines of communication. So here is a graphic. Our site is right under the meeting there at the center. We go from town above to Gown to the right. And these are the lines of convenience, the places we find, the shortcuts we take across the grass, how we define space. You can see a fairly ordinary campus, not unlike your own here on the right, a state university that's lined up, and then we have these concentrated points of meeting. So we're sort of getting around to talking about strategies of how the architecture might form. This is looking at the campus. The golden buildings are the city, if you will. The purple buildings are all of the university. The red buildings are buildings that are part of the arts complex that will be incorporated into this site in the upper corner there. And the green building is the School of Business, which will be moved onto the Arts and Business Gateway site. Here you can see the site in yellow. You can see the purple one is the original size of the whole State Teachers College when it started. The university is just pushing out in all directions of the land boundaries of the roads. And here you can see the graphic now that's starting to take some tectonic form of how we're defining those lines of convenience and the lines of synergy through the site as we look at what this place might be. We want it to be a porous canyon that you flow through into the campus. We have underground parking on 2 levels, and so the 30-foot grid drives a lot of decisions as a strategy of how we'll park cars, and there you can see 6 car parking spaces in a 30-foot grid sort of graphically represented. Then we put our lines of desire over on the right, and that shows you the flow. These are a bunch of actually foam study models that start to play with some of these ideas. And this is the plan with some rigor that we evolved. The art school is up there on the north end of it. The business school and hotel is on the left. At this rendition we have the gateway being commercial on the left with the hotel. You have business on the street, and you have arts adjacent to the art school and the facilities. We have housing, we have bookstore, lots of expansion. We're talking about floor and code things. This has to be totally costed by a contractor, Turner Construction, before presentation. This whole machine starts rolling the 2nd week in January, and the 3rd week in May, everything that you see has happened, including 3 trips across the world. This is assignable spaces, how things were evolving. These are these are all outtakes from the presentation we gave to the president of the university and the building selection committee with our team at the end of May of 2004. Energy. And here we have very strong architects all getting together in a collaboration to make an idea. If this wasn't a Mac, because this was set up on a PC, I apologize, but the winter sun penetration on the left is tied also to the idea that I can click a button and the sun goes over while I'm talking. We're talking abstractly about the use of a light well and Genzyme on the right, and we have diagrams here of insolation analysis, insolation, not insulation, and energy modeling of our scheme on the lower portion. It's in the desert. The metaphor are the canyons and the places of the place, the geology, if you will. These wonderful side canyons to Glen Canyon and whatever. Canyons and clouds, the metaphor. Again, this idea of narrative and conversation. And this is our scheme. We went on our last trip 3 weeks before D-Day, presentation day, P-Day. And we went, and this model did not exist on Sunday night when we landed. And with Ben, my partner, myself, and having access to the resources of 700 people, we went and got in the queue line at the model shop at Foster's, and this model happened. The context model was being built in Arizona. It's 7 foot long, full context model. We carried in our suitcase a plug, the exact size of our model, because we were working between metric and inches English. We took that plug along, and this model got built on top of it, and all the lighting was done in Arizona. And this whole translucent resin thing was on the vacuum form machines, the digital printers, and this model happened with about 18 people working on it in 36 hours. straight, not work hours. So again, as you look at your reviews, guys, and your pinup on the 12th of March, shit can happen. This is our model. There are people. There are spaces in between. We're designing as we go. We're flying by the seat of our pants. As we were working on the model late one night, we didn't know what to do in the center of this canyon courtyard here, and we didn't have an artist in mind. And so I said, what about James Turrell? And I've been collaborating with Jim Turrell. So we made a quick call. He was interested in playing, and we talked about this whole idea of this sort of IT solar pylon here being a Jim Turrell collaboration of light and technology. Again, we go back to our culture and our place. These are original dwellings in the Southwest, and these are the cliff houses and classrooms and dormitories. And this was a sketch that Norman Foster's crack partner that does these things, this isn't Norman anymore. We got one sketch out of Norman that was original for the presentation, which I somehow got cut out of here. It's a graphic diagram. I was trying to shorten things down a little bit. But this drawing was done again in 6 hours. It was just in his workday of dealing with the whole global nature of what was about. This, because we're not on, again, digital, you'll have to believe me, we left as a leave behind a flip book. You know those little flip books, some more kids, you flip the book and things happen, whether they be people running up and down, buildings being built, whatever. Well, we made a little flip book that we left as a leave behind for memory with the client. And this animation is actually that flip book, and what happens when I click the thing, believe me, is that this flattens down, the camera point enters here, and literally flies through the scheme at the scale of a person, looking and seeing, and the whole thing evolves. Fairly graphic, but there. What happened with that is that was an idea that I wanted to do the flip book. Remember, we landed on Sunday night. Tuesday morning, as we're doing a debrief, we're going to be leaving and getting back on the plane on Saturday, so we have to have all this shit together. And I came up with the idea of the flip book. Everybody brought into that idea, had some discussion about it, got refined, and we had an animator that lived below the big drafting room, in a drafting room below the big sexy one. And he was at his computer, and he was not an architect, but he was an animator that's on their staff. That's an amazing human being. He just, in fact, sent me an inquiry because he's now out on his own. But he sat at his machine, and Adam did the rough draft of the idea of a flip book from all the drawings we had, and they were digital and all this stuff, such that by Tuesday night, we are seeing a first cartoon from his digital workup, and we can flip it. What happens at Foster's office in these skills is how do you manage your equipment? So he has a log of every one of the 700 computers that are in the office at that time. He sees when somebody leaves work and releases their computer. He grabs it. Okay, he started final rendering of this flip book on Wednesday night, and by Friday morning we had bound copies of the book in our hand because he had 70 computers plotting for 48 hours to make the flip book. Okay? This is the world you're inheriting. This is the world you're going to occupy. You ready for it? So this is the entry to the Arts and Business Gateway. Again, this welcoming gesture, which is now a parking lot of a defunct 1950 shopping center. This is Taxi, a brownfield site on the railroad tracks, the skyline of Denver, Colorado. This is Taxi, a mixed-use building. This is a collaboration of 4 different architects. That was a marriage that was made, sort of like they do in India still, I guess. This was not by choice. A chosen marriage is hard enough to make work, as we know from just life. A made marriage is hell. But I have a client that's more interested in the process almost than the product. And so with David Baker and Harry Teague and Alan Brown and ourselves, we got put in bed together to make this building happen. And we decided on one building rather than multiples, with each one of us putting our own control and signature on each building. And Harry Teague worked on the first level and the lobby, basically, and we collaborated on the big idea of the bar. Alan Brown worked on interiors on 2. 3 and 4 were housing, and David Baker with his expertise in low-cost housing, jumped in with some plans there. And in the chaos of it, I was just going nuts, okay? We were sort of always considered to be the people that would put it all together in the skin. And as a way of mentally being able to, and this is 5 years in the process, so this is a long up and down journey, okay, before the beginning till now. And one day I called Mickey and said, you know, the only way we're going to get this paper out and it's going to make any sense at all is we need an editor. And we got a great food editor and a great sports editor, great business editor. That's what all these other people were in their little fragments. But I'm going to be the city editor. I'm going to put the paper together so it gets out tomorrow morning. And with the hat of editor, which everybody lived with, I had sort of this overseeing coordination thing, plus the sort of energy, and this building came to be reality. And then we had Jane Smith, who was a colorist, added into the mix because she was the partner of one of the architects. And so she brought her color sensibility into the mix, so we had a fifth designer. So this is the world you will inherit. And this is Taxi on the Platte River. And since then, we're the last Indian standing. Somehow that happens because we have the staying power and we have the energy and the passion. And we are now master planning the entire length of the river for about a mile around the Taxi site. We are meeting with the city. We are talking about the RTD facilities on the railroad tracks. We are doing digital things. We are developing next phases. And right now, we are about to embark on Taxi 3.3. We have since added a new architect into the mix, Steve Denia from Jackson, Wyoming, which I suggested to the table. Bruce Mao is in the game, and we'll be having dinner at this site next week with David Adjaye, who has just completed a contemporary museum in Denver. That will become part of the conversation along with Bruce Mao. Very dynamic, very exciting, but we have our building by ourselves with no other collaborators, and boy, does it feel good. Taxi 3.3 is going to rock. It's going to be totally different than anything you've seen here and totally for the place, making the spaces in between. In the midst of all that, in the summer of 2006, the spring of 2006, a sheik, literally from Dubai, comes to my studio, being brought there by an engineer architect from New Jersey who is a consultant to the sheik. This is the Tatweer Iconic Towers competition. He graduated from U of A. He figured an architect from the desert would be good to take to the desert. And we became part of an invitation in the end for a competition that ran 4 weeks for 4 towers, iconic towers on the Emirates Highway across the Emirates, outside on the edge of the sand dunes of Dubai. And the players were Zaha Hadid, RMSJM, I think, Lab Studio, the Leapson guys from down in Australia, and 2 or 3 at Foreign Office, I think, was there. And we were one of 7 people, I believe it was, to play this competition. First phase for playing was $25K, 3 weeks to play. You didn't get to go to Dubai first to figure it out. You would get to Dubai on the second phase of the competition. So we had to do our own research. Fortunately, we only had 3 weeks. We argued about doing it. I was very skeptical. But it was really, competitions are always a great shot in the arm for your studio to really jazz up everybody's attitude about life and where you're going. Hopefully they're not too expensive and damaging. These are plates out of the book that we had to provide along with 2 boards at the end of stage 1. Project comprehension had to do with understanding what, again, the architecture, the place, the climate, the factors were. This is what those sand dunes look like. This is actually Abu Dhabi on the right, which I was in a charrette with a couple months ago, still waiting to be paid. But it was really great to design 80% of a country. But these are our images. This is our pinup. These are things that are influencing our ideas. And our 4 towers became 3 towers. We talked about skyline and buildings and where they're at. You can see the Eiffel Tower on the left. You can see our Tatweer project on the right. But going to Dubai, one thing we immediately thought about was you're pretty screwed up to think that a tall building can be iconic in Dubai. You've all been watching the news, right? You've all been seeing the ups literally and the downs, the tallest building in the world, the Burj by SOM. So how can a tall building be iconic in that zooty place? So we brought some other things to the conversation, but these are more of our quick studies. Berta, see that mesh? Yeah, how about that? That's in-house joke. Not a joke, in-house investigation. Design principles, we talked about uses. We had offices, we had hotels, we had housing, we had all these different uses. And what we decided to do is rather than having the Emirate Highway run through the towers, we were going to build a garden on top of the Emirates interchange over the highway, and the towers would float on the highway. We were interested in circulation of both vehicular and pedestrian, and service, etc. We were interested in sun and wind and orientation because we thought that iconic would be zero carbon. New word that we're getting to know, zero carbon. But back in 2006, it was just starting to be a cool idea. So zero carbon, and besides that, a social space, a microclimate, if you will, a garden, a market, a souk, if you will, that takes back all of the tradition, because in Dubai, we had learned from our research, there is the separation of genders, there is the lack of public space, there is lack of community in the spaces in between, and to be iconic, we want it to be zero carbon and a social place to change the social culture of Dubai. Crazy, right? 3-week competition you're sort of getting into because you really aren't interested, but you raise the bar, why do it? So we have views, we have microclimate, we have power and water, we have form. And this is the scheme that we came up with. We bagged the 4th tower. We didn't like the symmetry of 4 on the 4 corners of the intersection. We made 3. The tall tower that you're seeing is 1,350 feet tall. The second one, the blue one, is 1,150, and the little one behind it is 950 feet tall. These people are entering a garden that you see represented. And I forgot to say, we'll go back to postscript about the Arts and Business Gateway in a second. But here you can see, again, you borrow things from other ideas, whatever. So you see some of our clouds floating around. You got 3 weeks, you got to run fast. And that emerald that you see there was visible from the Emirates Highway going under this complex. And this complex is almost 2 kilometers elliptical in size. Is this suspended emerald green object lit at night, which is a business center and a spa, playing to both the business and the hedonism of the place, connected into the 3 towers. And the 2 towers are residential, and the white tower is a hotel with vertical gardens, and all of the mixed-use business components are adjacent to that long passageway under the skylit edge of the walled garden that we were creating. So, with this in hand, they were late in announcing who won to the next phase, for phase 2. I am walking the streets of New York on the way back from Toronto where I'm teaching, and my assistant calls me and says, we got a letter. Starts to read the letter. It's from Dubai. We have canceled the 2nd stage of the competition. Great. That's cool. You know, you were really skeptical it was real anyways. We regret to inform you that we have this change of venue, etc. And this was not a general letter to all the participants. It was to us specifically. And the last paragraph of the letter is, we have canceled the competition because you have won outright in the 1st stage. Okay? Good. It is Ramadan next week. Can you make it to Dubai before Ramadan? So what do, right? You want to be cool. You've won the goddamn thing. You know, this is like $1 billion or $2 billion project. Billion with a B. You know, it is way out there, and you're still skeptical. Okay? Ben and I fly to Dubai, 14 hours. We rendezvous in New York. I did go home from that call and had a couple days to regroup, trying to convince them they could wait, but they weren't to be delayed, and we thought, okay, let's put it out there and get it over with. Let's kill the pain or make it go. We fly in. We are totally zombies. We are not met at the airport in Dubai. That's the first time. We land in the middle of the night, early morning, like 3 in the morning, whatever. That's the way it works. And suddenly, the man that recommended us to do this from New Jersey has left the services of the Sheikh. They're going to do it in-house. There's nobody to greet us at the airport. We finally, after a few phone calls, get to somebody that tells us what hotel to go to. Okay, and we've bought the tickets to Dubai on our nickel. We have gotten zero monies. The $25,000 is still elusive. We are in the hole when we walk on the tarmac. For the 25 really didn't cover the competition, but it was fun. We now have another $15,000 in expenses. We are checking into a hotel where they ask us to present our American Express card. And you know how scary that is, right? But it'll all be fine. We rest a little bit, and by mid-afternoon we are picked up by the new handler who is in-house. Very pleasant gentleman, I think a Lebanese gentleman. And we're trying to figure out a little bit as we get in the Land Rover and drive out into the desert, still sort of zoned from the time change. And you're all too young. Has anybody ever heard of the Avengers TV series? Okay. The Avengers was this very surreal black humor thing that's way out on the edge, funny as hell. It was back in the 60s, and probably when I was in college like you are, Diana Rigg became a heartthrob. You know, she dressed in leather and rubber and all this stuff, and she went on to become a Shakespearean actress, right? And there was this guy named Patrick McGee, and they drove these funny cars, but every episode was wacko, okay? Well, we drove on to the set of the Avengers, okay? We turn into the site of Tatweer on the Emirates Highway, their corporate offices, and we see first on the roof, a 20 times life-size dirt bike motorcyclist on a ramp on the roof of the building. In the parking lot are dinosaurs, because they're into entertainment as well, we find out. There is a 2/3 life-size model of the space shuttle. We park in the shade of this bizarro desert oasis environment, looking at this shitty building, and Ben looks at me and says, "Will, there's tigers in there." "Right, Ben." "Sure." Okay. We walk into the lobby with our handler, Ben and I. We are greeted immediately by too much Bazzazzi Italian tile, too much shiny Ames furniture, which I love, a lady in a black burqa with a slit, and off to the right are 3 large windows like you would see at the Portland Zoo, and the 2 biggest Bengal tigers live, not stuffed or faux, pacing around the enclosure. Okay? The second meeting of the sheikh, when he met me the first time, he was not in the white cloak of his religion and his order, comes out of the elevator. And suddenly we go and we start talking about this opportunity, and we are greeted as the winners. They are not interested in zero carbon. They are not interested in social. They are not interested in the ideas of the book. They love the boards. It's about image. My stomach is falling out of the bottom. I asked and was shown that afternoon, because we're on the edge of Ramadan, you remember, so there's religious things are starting, and I respect that. I asked to see the other boards. They were all shown to me. We want it clean. We were the only scheme that was not a blob, a fold, an angle, a rake from some other planet that could have been anywhere. We got into what it was about, and they appreciated that part of it, and they were intrigued. The next day, which was Friday, we were given a free play day in the morning, but that night, well, we were taken to the site, and it was just a sand dune. We were taken out after this encounter where we would be building this, and it was like, whoa, it's just a lot of sand, okay, on a highway, right? We went back to the hotel that night. We had dinner in a sort of chain restaurant in this fancy-ass hotel because we were somewhat exhausted. We figured we'd, after dinner, maybe recover a little bit with some food and go for a walk and discover the place a little bit more. So at the end of dinner, they're very interested in Dubai of how they're serving you, because there's 90% of the population are people that are there to serve you, and there's a bunch of expatriates and a very small resident population. And a tall blonde lady came up after dinner, after we'd been given several cards about the waiter, the waitress, all this stuff, and she handed us a card that we'd fill out to rate their service for the dinner. Tall blonde, very handsome woman. Spoke English, obviously. She was from Ukraine. And I asked her, what is this place really about? What is it like to be here? Okay? Her words, exact quote, because I couldn't make this up. "Sir, this place is like smoking. It's addictive, and you know it will kill you." She had been there 9 years. She went to a camp outside town every night. And that was her camp, meaning where they live for the 10,000 employees of this hotel chain. I asked if we could get to the water because it seemed like it was right there. You could see it from the room almost. Could we walk over there? Between gated walled communities, traffic, freeways, spaces in between, they're totally inhospitable. We couldn't even find it. Okay? I had pretty well determined in my mind that I would resign the competition. I had to figure out how to get the $65,000 or whatever owed to me at that point. So I said, I'll be thinking about it. Enjoy your holidays. I'll get back with you. And once the check crossed our desk about a month and a half later, I notified them that I was resigning the commission. It was interesting because a lot of my clients that knew about this thing, and it's a $1.5 billion opportunity. It's a crazy thing. So, this is all in the last couple of years. I'm not showing you 40 years of my life here. This is, 4 years of my life, sort of. Flip a strip, the green thing here, this is a competition. This was last year with a museum. I'm going to finish this up in 5 minutes real quick, so this is going to be like motion pictures now. This is a typical strip shopping center. The Contemporary Art Museum in Scottsdale had a competition to look at what you could propose to do as an architect to reclaim the strip shopping centers of our world. You've seen this one before. There's one like this in Corrales, there's one in Portland, there's one in Seattle, there's one in Phoenix, there's one in New Jersey. There's the site. You can see the L-shaped white building, 1960s shopping center. These are the site context elements that we started evaluating. This was a competition that was out for 3 months. And finally, because it's our town, on the Tuesday before the Monday it was due, so 6 days, I got in the car and looked at the sites. And 5 days before it was due, I came in the studio and said, we're playing the competition. That's the way to minimize your hurt, okay? So in 5 days, we went from not being on the site to full site investigations, full site photography, and a crash with 4 people cranking this puppy out, including a full cost estimate and proposal, because that's what made it interesting to us. They really talked like it was being serious to be realized. This is existing. Terrible parking lot, too many driveway cuts, all kinds of bad stuff. This would have been first phase, how you would start to reclaim this thing by making the parking lot logical, 1 driveway cut, graphics, redos, greening, starting to whole strategy going. Second phase, little courtyard by the restaurant back there on 3 and 4, that's a projection screen in the back courtyard that did exist. And then phase 3 is adding an edge to the street to get at the proper street density of a real street, like a real city like Portland, which is unknown here. And suddenly you have sustainability as the agenda, you see solar, you see all the trick things that we all want to talk about and should be talking about and doing. And this is what it turned into. That becomes that. That becomes that. So it made us think. We became part of a conversation. We didn't place, we didn't finish. Again, the jury threw out all the rules about cost and everything at 1 o'clock the day of the jury and went for something that would have zoot appeal and catch the imagination. And they created a museum exhibit that was about details because they could exhibit them, and nobody was really serious about the bigger idea of the consequences. And other than a symposium that I was invited to speak at with about 8 of my peers and colleagues, it just sort of became an incomprehensible blur in a museum's venue for a community of a really important idea. Sad, but you have to give it your best. Skylines are important. I think we might have mentioned this whole idea. We identify cities and have great memories of them by how buildings leave the ground and the environment of the 30 foot of the pedestrian. And we look at skylines for how they are memorable. And we look at this and you can say, you see Paris there. The Guarantee is the first high rise by Louis Sullivan in Buffalo. That's not even much of a high rise there, that little second one in the line. Then we have Chrysler and Empire State Building. You know that's New York. We then have Lever House. We then have Price Tower over there, which is almost not as tall as Guarantee by Sullivan. That's Frank Lloyd Wright. That's the tallest building he ever built in his life, even though he talked about a mile-high building. Then you got Mies van der Rohe, who did a bunch of neat buildings. That's Seagram and then Dominion Center in Toronto. You see the tapered tower of John Hancock, and you know Chicago. Tallest building in Phoenix at the time was the Bank One Center there. And then you have IDS in Minneapolis by Philip Johnson. You have IMP, the Hancock building in Boston. And you have the Green Tower of Norman Foster and Commerce Bank in Frankfurt. And this was our idea in a quick study, again, almost overnight for a developer. Our offices were in the low white building here. And when this developer bought this building, he got a parking lot with the deal on this site to park this building and wanted to have an idea of what might happen. And that's a 789-foot building, the tallest building in Phoenix, which does not have a skyline except for its landscape. And again, we did this quick little resin model and idea, which actually went to the mayor of the city. And a lot of press and a lot of conversation. And unfortunately, we have an airport that rules the world, as most airports do, because they're high income centers in every city. And there's this whole idea with our airport downtown that we'd be threatening the safety of the flight patterns of the airport by this building 6 miles away from the field on a engine out procedure that would, and the whole city has this flat hat on it now, capped at about 300 feet, 400 feet. So we'll never have a skyline, maybe. The idea of the block and the grid of a city. This is Paris, after Haussmann cut up the medieval plan. Brilliant move. And this is Paris. So when we got the commission to analyze 77 acres of development near the Peter Eisenman football stadium in Glendale, Arizona, we started talking about the block and the scale of the street. And Paris became something we looked at because we all love Paris, right? It's hard not to love Paris, but look at what's happening beyond the edge of the city. Look at those towers out there, bad seeds of Corbu out on the edge. But Paris is Paris, about 7 stories. This is Manhattan, long, narrow blocks. Some of you hopefully have walked these, and they have the strange proportion. They're long east-west. They're narrow going north-south up the island. And that's the character of Manhattan, its own kind of city. This is a city in Rajasthan, a province of India. All of these images are exactly at the same scale. So check this out. Oops. Paris, New York, a desert city called Rajasthan, with as many people here as you see in Paris, maybe more. Look at the grain. It's like the fine veins of a leaf. The spaces in between. And that's what the city looks like at density. Again, not very tall, but very, very energized and dense. This is Barcelona. This amplifies more of those blocks because we're getting at the scale that we needed and thought we wanted to talk about, and fond memories of many trips to Barcelona. And you have that rotated square that's so distinctive in the Serta plan. That's the view you saw a couple seconds ago. This is Portland. And a bunch of us in this class, all of you I'm sure have walked the streets of Portland, but some people from my studio have walked it, maybe looking at it a little differently now than when the semester started. And that's the 200-foot block. And this is a view from the rooftop looking at our site. The skyline of, this is one of the 10 best cities, not in America, but the world. Again, all these surveys are sort of wonky, but I tend to believe that this is one of the 10 best cities in the world from my travels and experience. And we're very fortunate that it's in this place, in this region, and it's a very special thing. Phoenix growth, 1881 up there in the center right is that little black spot that's a half a square mile. And in 2004, that's turned into the 5th largest city in America. This is the city at the turn of the 20th century, city to the 19th century. And we have streetcars, which we lost, power, which we had, high ceilings, no air conditioning on the left, and 14 streetcar lines in the city of Phoenix in 1921. 14 light rail lines in the city. And by the end of World War II, we went to 0 with the abominable treatment of General Motors. Right now, we should let the suckers die in vengeance for what they did to our cities. At the end of World War II, when they, through private corporations, bought up every streetcar line in America and quietly castrated them, disabled them, killed them, so that we could buy diesel buses that they were selling. That's a fact. That happened. That's as sinister as Hitler or Saddam Hussein. Really, in the big picture of things. We say people didn't die, but people did die because of those actions. So here we have an urban city on the right that you might think that's a picture of Portland. And now it's sprawl. Small, smoggy, sprawl, 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 sprawl. And Barack came to speak there a week and a half ago because it is at the center of the crisis of foreclosures and homes and abandonment and the travesty and the sadness that we will get past. This is an aerial view at the same scale of what Scottsdale looks like. This photograph basically I did in a high school workshop at the museum tied to flip-a-strip. And this image takes you all the way from south of the hospital in Portland, north of the Iron Bridge, and it's just one fraction of the city. The city is 40 miles long. This is about 2 miles long. There's nothing there. This was our project, however, 77 acres, and you can see the grid represented here. And it's green, and there's a buffer, and that's the tallest building in Arizona. I'm going to build that tower one of these days. I'm going to turn one of those long buildings I do on its end, because I do think a skyline is important, and that's Peter Eisenman over there on the right. And this is the corporate sites along the 101 freeway. And we worked with environmentalists, landscape architects, planners, civil engineers, farm consultants, all to vision this idea of a place being a place of work, because what's happened in Glendale, Arizona is that there's lots of houses and no work. All the Class A office spaces and business drive to the Scottsdale Air Park 30 miles away, or to the East Valley where all the digital shit is. So what we're trying to do is bring some housing, 1,600 units, plus 4 million square foot of office in an urban environment. And can we build an urban environment? I don't know. And create this place in the desert. A market, covered bazaar, and spaces in between. You know, we talked about buildings a bunch in this little seminar, about those object buildings, but it's really about places like this, from the city of Toledo on the left, a medieval city and outside Madrid, to the harbor of San Sebastian in the center with Rafael Maneo's great theater and art museum buildings animating the streetscape and the life of a real urban place, to on the right, Rem Koolhaas's Casa Musica in Oporto, Portugal, where this picture at 2 days after Christmas was taken, and it was not just about skateboarders, but it was about that little girl in the center and her new pair of roller skates that she got from Santa Claus. An amazing sculpture, active to the place, not afraid of the skateboarders, almost barren and sculptural, but working because of the amazing park that you see right across the circle. As architects, I encourage you all to think beyond the building. It's the spaces in between our buildings, your buildings, that will make the difference as much as your buildings ever will. And wherever you can, be part of the communities that you will be undoubtedly part of making. So that's about the spaces in between. And that's, as always, a little bit longer than I said I would talk. And hopefully it gives you some reasonable images and thoughts. And I didn't see any questions. Morgan said there were some. For the record, this idea of the art of architectural practice. Who's got the question? Remember I asked people to have questions? There you go.
So these days you probably are pretty successful, I guess, in getting commissions and all that and finding work. Well, in the grand scheme.
Okay. After we all laugh about that one, what do you want to say? What's the question?
Okay.
Okay.
When you were starting out, how did you go about getting jobs in the first place?
Okay. We'll take, when I was starting out, I got my first moonlight job a year after I started working in an office. That was in little interior at what's the Catholic social thing that's in college? Any of you Catholics here? What, the foundation? I wasn't Catholic, but I got this little commission because I knew the artist that was asked to do some art in the space. They did a remodel. I just kept my ears open. I started drafting in basements of the guys that were in the thing while they were building their own houses, so I'm sort of getting into building. First little commission was a little thing that I looked back and I stumbled. I'd look at the things I did. It was totally, I wasn't ready to do it. It was a room. It was like a third as big as this room. It was a living room in this house that was the campus student facility for the Catholic organization, right? But then when I came to the desert, back to the desert in 1970, after I had graduated from college with my BFA, the first job I got after no jobs being available, and I wasn't hired by the place I really wanted to work for because I had long hair, and they didn't like my redwood work boots I went for an interview with. And the last year I had spent with a student of Saarinen, meeting with museum directors and presidents of Federal Reserve banks, and I thought I was okay, and he thought I was okay to take in public. But I had people that wouldn't give me an interview because of the way I looked, and I found that out after the fact. But I got a job in this down market in an interior design firm, business interiors firm. And it wasn't but a month that I was there. I'm sort of driven, as you maybe guess. I'm fairly intense at times. And there was a tile salesman that came in, Dick Van Gilsey was a Dutchman, and he had just opened a tile importing business. He was working out of his house, and he was hawking his tile to this interior firm. And suddenly, he was probably just pimping me for a sale, right? But he wanted a little remodel of a garage for his family in a historic area town. So that became a very early job that I sort of was doing on that moonlight basis, right? The little sketch never got built. We went out to preliminary, whatever. And then as you progress more, I probably had 14 little remodels and patios and little things under my belt working what's called moonlighting back then. Now it's a thing that I worry about for liability as a principal, because in some way your activities could be tracked back to me if you're working for me, because this blurred line of litigiousness and whatever. If it happens, I'm not looking for it. It does happen, and I'm not going to go there. But that became the start of the job. But I passed my exams the first time around in 1974. I took the exam in 73, the same time as somebody with conventional education. And I had one of those moonlight patios that I was doing, actually 2 moonlight patios. And at the end of my taking my exams, one of the guys I was doing a patio for commissioned me to do a $10,000 cabin, 1,000 square feet in Flagstaff, Arizona, with a $1,000 fee. And that fee of $1,000 plus hourly contracts at $7 an hour in 1974 said, I'm ready to go on my own. And then it was sort of getting things published right away, some of those early moonlight things. I wasn't ever bashful about. I realized that people aren't going to find you. You got to sort of help, and that's part of marketing. And I mean, I looked at my folk hero at that time, Frank Lloyd Wright, and he was marketing 101 that could be taught at the Harvard Business School, because he was always ahead of the curve and presenting himself. That's part of what we sort of have to do, because it doesn't always happen for you. So suddenly I had an article in Sun Living, the home section like we have in the paper today, about one of my patios with a picture of me and my happy owners and my skill saw and my hammer and my long hair, and we're building a patio, right? And then all of a sudden somebody, after they saw something in Sunset Magazine, I had 20 articles in Sunset Magazine in the course of the first 5 years of my practice. And that wasn't making you maybe famous with your peers, but clients were calling. You became part of their scrapbooks for when they would, when they could build that house, build that dream, and you were somebody that was written about and was noted. And then you got the bravery, because I wasn't consciously, you had work, you were sort of living the life, you were the artist, you were doing your thing. And then I remember, finally, well, 2 things. One, I did get some commercial buildings fairly quickly. One was that one of my little remodels, I went to this sheet metal shop for the air conditioning, and I met these guys, the Carver family, and they had just gone out on their own. They had a Butler building, right? And they had drawings for a Taco Bell office block in front. You know how Butler buildings always have the standalone? And it was literally 4 arches and a tile mansard. And they wanted to know if I do the working drawings for that building, if I'm interested. I said no, but I'm interested in doing an office for you. And so I designed them a building, and that became the MCOR Carver headquarters. And it was this little thing that was hand-built. And it was concrete block because the brother was a brick mason. And it was this rolled metal vault because they were metal people. And they did ductwork and all the furniture and all this good stuff. And all of a sudden, in the course of that, a guy back in the shop building the light and the table I designed for the office said, Will, you're going to do a house for me. Oh, cool. That's cool, Dave. And I thought, blue-collar guy, just talk, right? And next week, I'm working with him on the project a little more. He said, that house you said you were going to build for me last week? I just bought the lot with my wife this weekend. You want to come and look at it? So that became a house that took a year to build. It was owner-builder, 3-foot thick desert masonry walls, and he's a welder. He's a steel maker. He's very ambitious. His honeymoon was he took his wife to Australia, and she thought it was like for a couple weeks, and they came back a year and a half later because he worked his way across Australia as a metal worker. Okay, and that was the start of their relationship together. So we built a roof out of used oil pipe that's 60 foot on a side, 10-foot modular space frame that was lifted with one crane and put on the walls that took a year to build as one piece. And then at a certain point, about a couple years later, I actually applied for an RFQ for a library because I was finally realizing bigger things and wanting to go there, right? And I applied for that and took down 36 architects and got my first library to do. That's how it happens. It's as silly as that and as weird as that, and you never know where it's going to come from. And if I told you what happened from the time I left Eugene yesterday morning at 9:30 in the morning and the time I went to bed at 11:30 last night, there are 6 new jobs that appeared on my horizon. But in the week between being here the last time and being here today, or last Friday, I should say, the Friday before I was here last Friday. I sat with my partners on Thursday night from 7 in the evening till 1 in the morning, deciding which 6 people I was going to leave go. And we are now, instead of 18 people, we are now 11 people. And it'll be a while, and right now there's no paycheck on Monday, and the partners have not paid themselves for 6 weeks, and that's getting old. And yet we have a projection that we will be well by the end of March, and things are coming together, and we are paying our other bills that are critical, like professional liability and other things. The 6 people we let go, 7 people we let go, totally understood, because last fall when it was getting critical, rather than letting anybody go, we all took a 10% cut. And that's the responsibility of having employees and being who you are. And some of those things that I talked about yesterday and lit up will be there. I got an email when I was here at studio on Wednesday that a 226 unit housing project we've been working on for 7 months, almost pro bono with a small remuneration, is a full go project in Boulder, Colorado. A little theater that we have been asked to study pro bono is finding legs, and there'll probably be $60,000 worth of fees for us within the next 3 to 4 months. And we have the sexiest little first community college building that I just had a 2-hour conference on the phone in my ear driving to you today that's totally bought off and the happiest client I've ever had. And it's never been quite this rough, but yeah, now I'm big and famous, and God, it must be easy, you know? But it's sort of a rewind of everything I just told you about, because the only thing I ever did to make wages that wasn't a compromise short of digging a ditch, which I have done as well, was I did shop drawings for an ugly-ass building once that was a cement panel system that I was interested in, and I got $300, and it made payroll for my singular self and expenses for 2 weeks by drawing those shop drawings for this salesman that knew I was in trouble and said, will you draw the drawings? But I've never designed anything. I mean, if you see a bad building or something that's not quite as good, they're probably there, but I was trying, folks. I was really trying. It wasn't because I was selling my soul. But there are those things that you now wake up and look at it and say, oh my God, you know? I mean, they just weren't as far as you thought they were at that moment you did it. But they were with good intention and pushing the envelope to the most. So next question. Somebody's over here. You want to share that with her? I'll try and make the answers shorter because we only have a half hour.
My question has to do with LEED and green buildings. I really appreciate that you turned down that building that they didn't want to go for the carbon zero. But do you think there was a chance, it's a 2-part question, do you think there's a chance that you could have talked them into it? And then the second thing is whether or not LEED is the way to go. Do you think that programs like that should be mandated in states for green stuff to be mandated?
4-part question, that's cool. Okay, so first off, I believe I've always been green before it was a acronym, LEED. That happened in the late 90s. I was always known as an environmental guy, and people bought the weird shapes and forms and buildings I was doing because they always rationalized, oh, that guy works, he's green. You know, that was back in the 70s when people were doing their lean-to things and their angles and their collectors and thermal mass and trom walls and all this shit, so they always gave me a buy because he's green, you know. And it almost pissed me off. They were talking more about me being green than being cool, you know. I mean, it was just, you know, it was there, right? Central Library was designed 10 years before LEED was an acronym, and it could be EB LEED Platinum, and we hope it will be shortly, which is the existing building way of looking at LEED. So it's a landmark building. It's still the largest, probably greenest institutional building in America, you know. And again, but the commissioning of $150,000 in this day and age is not something the library, when they can't afford to keep the building open, can afford to invest in the commissioning. A lot of public clients now want LEED-like buildings because it has become sort of a terrible thing of how these things are rated. When we talk about U.S. Green Building Council, what do you think? U.S. It's like USDA, right? It has nothing to do with U.S. It is something that was invented by out-of-work engineers in the down of the 90s thinking that they could get another consultant cash stream going. So let's make services for thinking environmentally. It would be wonderful if there was an interior of energy, excellence, etc. And it would be wonderful if, along with the life safety code and the planning and zoning code that was proper, Just normally, it would be a given. You wouldn't have a choice, are we LEED or not? And again, the system was devised in eastern realms, not desert realms. So as a desert person, we really have the burden because, Oregon's still pretty good, right? Because there's an environment with humidity and all these environmental things that, it works, right? It is about point counting, and when you have rules that give you 1 point for a bus stop within a block, 1 point for a bike rack, and 1 point for a shower that you can take after you ride your bike to work to park it in the bike rack, and gives you a total maybe for 2 points for the best environmental mechanical system you can do. This system is not exactly tuned up, folks, to be really big in thinking, right? As I sat at the presentations last night, and listened to 4 design teams and developer teams present their credentials to do this new building in Portland, everybody was throwing their bravado of gold, platinum, and silver. Okay, I have 2 now I have 1 LEED accredited professional on my staff. It's like, I should be LEED accredited, but it's just like I don't have an engineer's license. I know the theories of it, but I don't want it, but I've got to. I've got to do that for myself as a marketing thing, because it is being a marketing tool. It is totally about marketing it. In your zip code in Oregon, developers, I had my developer come from that last project I showed up here to talk to people, and they were saying, they were toying with the idea, are we certified? Are we silver? What's our standard, right? And these developers in Portland know that if you don't go LEED platinum, forget it, because the guy with the condo project across the street, he will be, and he'll be bragging it up, and he'll beat you, because there's starting to be social concern. In the desert, people haven't got that awareness yet. But in the case of Dubai, as they go belly up, and they're being bailed out now by Abu Dhabi, which is probably going to buy them very shortly. We're going to read about that buyout very shortly. It's happening because all the oil is really in Abu Dhabi. This workshop I just went to for 2 weeks in Abu Dhabi, they are doing the zero carbon city. They are living that agenda and moving into it, where they had no ideas of that direction 5 years ago. They saw their brothers and sisters to the southeast, southwest, southeast of Abu Dhabi is Dubai, going and tanking in all the narcissism and decadence, and they didn't want to be them. So there is a difference there. The client, I tried the damnedest, but at that point it was also a decision I had to make in life, is do I want to spend my life on an airplane going halfway around the world, back and forth 4 or 5 times a year? I really get a strong feeling about regional local buildings. Like this teaching gig is a sweet one, because I'm in one time zone sometimes, I'm in the same time zone other times, and the jet lag isn't what it was to go teach Yale. Okay? And you make decisions in life of who you want to be. A lot of people that are very successful, I would not want to adopt the life they have chosen in any way, shape, or form. Life is too valuable. As you get older, you realize the preciousness of that. So that's another thing you'll come to, of course, when you are about to embark right now. Who knows what your boundaries are? I still have crazy unlimited boundaries. I'm just more selective as how I go on the journey right now. Did that answer all 4 parts of your question? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Hopefully somebody else. Yes?
What is the biggest mistake that you made starting out?
What is the biggest mistake I made starting out? It wasn't a mistake, it was an awareness I had of the world. As worldly as I wanted to be, I maybe didn't have as much worldly experience to try to take some of the positions I would take, and they were too narrow, and yet the projects were small, and I was working within the boundaries of that. I often got in trouble with clients, which I still would, but I always, whether it was a patio or a remodel or an addition or a teeny little house, I always discussed architecture with respect with my clients with a capital A. And sometimes you get ahead of the curve in that clients hire you for their project. So maybe I wasn't quite as finesseful as I could have been, always trying to talk and bring them along on a bigger journey, where I could have worked from the inside out rather than the big global in. That would be an approach. And with your optimism, hopefully you all have that, and that might be something that happens to you, right? I think a mistake that you will make is that you will not believe in yourself enough to reach far as you should. You will get comfortable taking a job in that local firm in your hometown or from the desk that you signed up with 2 days ago. And it will not be at the level that will tell you what really architecture is. It will be about being the technologist, the team member, the collaborator to make probably Metza buildings, mediocre things. I think all of you, if your ambition truly is to be an architect, you should put the pedal to the metal and go check it out at the highest level, because you're never going to know by working for a hack. That's not saying that the people down there were hacks, okay? But there are hacks out there, and some of you have worked for them already, and some of you will be chained to your computer boards because they're really interested in your fingers and your digital skills and not who you are in your mind, right? You will go into these offices and you will not challenge yourself or challenge your employers. You will just do what the day's assignment is. You will not be curious. All the fun things that you do and curious things that you inhabit your souls right now, hopefully inhabit them, as you discover things every day, you will sort of turn the switch to the left when it should be full on to the right. What I always advise people, well, right now, I still personally believe in what I did for an education, a good fine arts, good design, good art, good sociology, philosophy, all this mixed bag of a liberal arts. But today, rather than going out into the world with those tools that I built, I would be the first guy to line up and send all my applications to the best friggin' master's programs I understood that were really about the issues of the day in environment and community and zero carbon and placemaking, and really engage and get a master's, 3-4-year master's, whatever the hell. I would not go for a PhD in architecture because unless you want to teach, I really think your PhD is building those buildings, getting involved in that whole world. But then as you come out of that tunnel of the master's program, who do you admire? Who are those folk heroes? Is it too absurd for you to write Renzo Piano if you believe in Renzo Piano, or Tadeo Ando, or Sana, or Will Bruder, or whoever the hell you think you might be interested in? And all that can happen is that after 6 months or a year, ideally give it a year, you might say, this sucks. This was all a put-up deal in the magazines, and this was, you know, heard that guy lecturing. He's not what he said he was. But you would have been, you know, pick somebody that you really think is doing it, not just doing the business of architecture, but is creating those buildings that you picked, and we've added to the pick right now that you're analyzing. Go a place like that. Hell, life is too short anyway. Go for a couple years, go for a year. I mean, go to the best. And then at that point, maybe you're lucky and you're in a place where you say, hey, I'm not going to be the sole practitioner. Maybe I'm going to work on a team all my life. And that's happening more and more often. I'm very glad, and it was very sad for us to leave these 7 people. I mean, a few probably will stay let go because we should have probably done it. But you're so close to them and love them, right? But there's other people that, you know, I can't wait to dial the phone and say, hey, Anthony, you're back. You know, hope you didn't take another job, you're back. And they all know we want that, right? But you can be that person. I mean, you could, you know, but push yourself into that memory. You know, I went to work for Gunnar Burkertz. I knew probably after the first 3 months what I would learn and where I would go with it, and he was shocked as hell at the end of 11 months when I gave my notice. He couldn't believe it. We had a 4-hour exit interview. I was just a flunky little entry-level thing. But he was devastated. We evidently had a really good thing going. You know, and it was like oil and water, though, because I knew everything. I knew friggin' too much. And he was going through this transition point, and I was all over his case because he was really an amazing architect. He got this next step that I saw from my perspective at that time. And IBM was requiring 3 schemes, A, B, and C. Still happens, right? Throw 3 schemes. What the shit that's about? I mean, you're hiring me to do my best work. You know, it's not pick A, B, or C. You're not paying me for A, B, or C, really. You know? And they'd always pick the lesser scheme. And we talked about it in the exit interview. I said, look at what you did at Sterling Forest, Gunnar. You had these 2 boxes, and you had this thing that was, you know, you sold out. So it was contentious a little bit, and we came back together, and, you know, with the library and other journeys we had, and I was lecturing, I maybe made reference to this, I'm sorry if I repeated the story, but I was lecturing a year and a half after the year after the Central Library was done in Detroit at Lawrence Tech. And Gunnar is still there, and his wife, and Balthazar Korab, the famous photographer that I knew from when I worked back 20 years earlier, was in the audience. And I opened my lecture with a tribute to Gunnar, and I put 4 slides in of what he meant to me, because now I look back on Gunnar Burkertz, and I look at my sketch manner, my process manner, how I think about shit. I mean, I am so infected with that 1 year of my life that I was considering in conflict that I can't tell you, but it helped make me who I am today. And so if you work in those cases and really touch it, you're going to see that you want it, you have the goods for it and the passion for it, or you're going to quite frankly say that you don't have it. And maybe you don't want it, and maybe there's another place for you, because all of you don't have to become a designer. I need every one of you to be on my team to help me make what I do. You know, I'm a composer and I'm a conductor, right? But I need the best cellist, the best violin, the best drummer, and that's all credible stuff. I mean, everybody's together. I mean, buildings don't happen because of me, okay? I can only sort of try and do some things. But I think the mistake is you don't push yourself that level because you're comfortable and you say, well, then when I get out on my own, I'm going to be that architect that I've read about and want to be. But if you never have really seen it firsthand, you never can be that person. And why not help yourself out to be that person by putting yourself in the circulation for a couple of years while you're apprenticing to be at the best? You know, and whether you have a family or not, they'll come with you. They probably love you. They probably like you. You know, you'll have relationships, and it'll be decisions, and maybe you make the wrong choice. And it's very interesting. There's a woman in Texas that did a family tree of all the great architects of time. And I'm really a nut, as you know, about being into names and people and places and architecture and details and all this stuff. And I read this book, and it was really intriguing because this family tree went from the first modernist, and she connected up of where Todd Williams apprenticed for how long and what he became, and where Billy was and where Corbu was before he went to become this, and who worked for Mies. And you look at this thing, and she found, and here's a clue too, interesting clue. Unless you've got a very alive architect, okay? I like to think I'm alive, but you'll know what I mean. You want to go to a firm that is right on the cusp of being, and you can taste it. Right now, they haven't been at it forever. You don't want to go to work for some architects that you're not sure whether they're dead or alive at this point, because they're in a pattern in everything they do, and they can be the greatest name that ever did and have their wonderful masterpieces, but let's say they're over the hill and they're just living on that fame and living on that geometry. What she found was that typically, and I look back on my choices, first choice by luck when I was in college working for William Wenzler on the cusp. By the time I finished working for him, he had taken this big shitty developer job and he was on the down. But I got lucky. He was right there on the cusp with all this shit, and I was seeing it and tasting it and being part of it. I then choose to work with Paulo Solari. He's 40 years old. Okay, he's on the cusp. He hasn't written the book yet. He's writing the book. He's still struggling in the desert with his little buildings. He's becoming himself, and he's a genius. And I'm there, okay? 3 years later, I didn't want to be there because I already saw where that was, and I was somebody else that I wasn't when I was there, but I couldn't be, without Paulo, I wouldn't be here. Then I went for Burkert's, right? And like, he sneezed, and it was like Antoine Predock. He was on a cover, right? I mean, it was just there. It was news, right? You know? And then all of a sudden, you saw the next thing. So find that place to be and give it at least a year. You know, it's very strange how people make their myth, right? And how historians make our myth. Okay, Mario Boda, anybody know that architect's name? Probably, right? Okay, when you read the myth that was made about Mario Boda, he talks about his 3 guys. He worked for Corbusier as a young man, as a student in Venice on the hospital project. He doesn't tell you that Corbu had already died and drowned in the lake. He was in the studio working on the hospital project, trying to close it out after death for a few weeks. He worked for Carlos Scarpa. That was his professor. He didn't work for him, never did. He knew him. You knew me. Okay. And last but not least, he worked for Louis Kahn. He worked for Louis Kahn as a student at the University in Venice when Kahn, for 2 weeks, set up his models and installed the great Congress Hall presentation in Venice. End of story. Okay? But the myth is that was his rootedness. And myth built on that, and not to say that he's not been very successful. We can all judge what's there. He's probably more influential than any other modern architect of my time at one level. And influential to the root of a Lowe's hardware lumber store, to the strip shopping center, because it was a modernism we could sort of understand that was no different than Michael Graves' stucco. He was just doing it in masonry, and it looked more authentic, looked more real. So it's an interesting thing. Next, who wants to? You got one?
I got one.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is on or not, but I'm curious how you learn to bite your tongue sometimes. Not necessarily like with clients, and then in addition with collaboration, where a lot of times you want to learn more from somebody, but you really want to disagree with them about something, and you just totally derail the train of thing. So I'm
Well-
curious how you learn to when they say something and then just shut up.
Okay, well, words are really a powerful thing. They're really a powerful thing. And I've been fortunate in, it was interesting because, you know, I was sort of president of student council and got active in weird ways in high school and all this stuff. So that started a journey of communication, and communication is what we're really talking about. And then it's funny because Paulo Solari, when I worked there in 67, I think I told you in 68, he sees me at Central Library 20 years later in my life, and he tells funny stories about, you know, when I met Will and when he worked for me, I thought he was a deaf mute, okay? And that was maybe a big listening section of my life, so I didn't have much to say, and I asked a few questions, and I listened a lot, right? And I think that as you mature and gain more confidence of yourself, it's a process where you become better at respecting other people and knowing how important it is to that other point of view. And it's always changing, it's always dynamic, but it's about perspective and stopping to breathe, which I'm not always good at sometimes. And as we made the decision last week of who we would let go, we have 17 employees, we have 3 partners and myself, and we made up a list because we knew we couldn't push it any farther. And I went into that meeting, and what we did was, Rob, my partner, who's all 3 of my partners are great guys, he said, let's all write our names down, just make a list, right? And then let's rank our list, and I'll tabulate, and we'll see who's got 3 votes, no votes, what votes, right? And we basically, on the 7 people, identified 9 potential people that would go. And we all had little different takes on it. And so what I very quickly decided to do is I went last, because I wanted to listen. And it was really sincerely about listening. And just like when you listen to a client, always really listen. When you find yourself just giving them BS and pimping them, you know, reorder yourself. Reorder yourself. I mean, there's times we pretend we're listening to somebody, and normally you can see it, okay? But don't pimp people. Don't just put it out there. When you see yourself going slightly up, stop and take a time out, okay? But as we went around the table, you know, Rob had his reasons for his choices, and I listened very carefully to those, and they were valid, and they weren't the same as my reasons were. And then Ben talked, and he had slightly different reasons, and we sort of identified most of the same people. And then Richard talked. And then I actually repositioned 3 of my positions of ranking, and one person that I was ready to let go, I kept, or based on the conversation. But I was open, always be open to that possibility. But it was very interesting because in a democracy, which a marriage or a partnership or the world is at times, right? It does always, it's a challenge thing because in fairness and collaboration, and as we were in the quandary of this moment to make this decision a week ago, this is fresh, painful information, right? That week, knowing that it was there, I called Jim Rohn, a longtime friend that was the professional client virtually for the library that's become a lifelong friend, and he's always smart, and he's always a different ear. And I went to lunch with him and explained what I thought I had to do and where I was going, right? And I went through this whole agony of this has happened, and that's happened, and should we or shouldn't we, and we tried, and all this bullshit, right? And after I went on for about 20 minutes on this, I just shut my mouth like I can do. And, Jim, what? And he sat there for a couple minutes because he's that way. You know, you're sitting there with the silence, you know, what's going to say, right? He said, leadership. Leadership. Really, the most important thing that happened of advice to me was that simple word. I couldn't see it, my partners couldn't see it, Louise couldn't see it. Leadership. What that meant was that all of these things, at some point, the buck stops somewhere. And yes, I do own all the stock, but I am an equal at some levels with my partners, and I want to respect that, right? But he was challenging me to be a leader and set down some paths, be open, be listened, but lead. That was empowering. 2 days later, as I'm preparing this thing, because I've got my kitchen cabinet, I call Ed Riddell, my client from Jackson, which you saw as some of his projects, right? He's, again, longtime friend and a real smart businessman, really cocky son of a bitch, interesting guy. I went through the whole thing because he'd lived this whole thing, right? And I told him what I was going to do, and he said, how many people you going to let go? I said 6. He said, you're going to let 1 more go. Trust me. Because, and that was important, because 6 was probably not enough, and we were holding back because it was so painful. He said, whenever you have something like this happen, go 1 farther. You need to let 1 more go. That was smart advice. And then as the whole thing evolved, I'm constantly, so bring people around you that love and care, but just don't always tell you what you want to hear. That's important too. Be able to make friends and collaborators and partnerships and consultants and all this stuff. Never hire yes men and women. Never become a person that everybody doesn't want to say anything because they know they can never win. And that's difficult right now as I run around in studio to all you guys and become fairly critical at times of what you're doing. I'm not being critical to be mean. I'm becoming critical because I care about you. I care about what you're doing, what you're learning, what you're seeing. And the fact is that if you just show me 1 thing, your chances of getting crapped on are pretty strong. Show me 3 things, and we can probably make something out of that puzzle, and maybe it's none of them that you showed me, but those 3 things that you've showed me is going to spur you to something that none of us thought about. That's just like when I assigned the task in my studio of asking somebody, hey, this is your project. I'm working on the elevations. Give me some strategies about how the windows might work in your mind. I got to run over here. I got to go friggin' teach this class up in Oregon. I want to come back and I want to see some ideas, right? And when I came back from that class on the community college building, I saw 4 really not pushing at things, but they were ideas. But in getting to that idea and when I asked Dan what he had done to get to the idea, it's what he had done to get the idea that broke everything loose. And in literally 30 minutes, we had stuff going almost in the computer. And then it was all whited out and finessed and then ripped up and overdone and done the blah, 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 blah. But just give yourself that empowerment, of listening and whatever. And yes, you will. I probably stick my foot in my mouth, and the average is still 12 or so times a day. I'm better some days than other days, but you can get ahead of your skis real easy. So, got time for maybe 1 more question, maybe 2. Nico's trying to ask a question back there.
I have a question because everyone's about to go, hopefully work in firms sometime soon. So one, how do you create an environment in an office that gets the best out of the people around you? So really create a really great environment for that. And then from the perspective of people about going to those offices, what should they bring to the office to be able to engage as much as possible and create the best work?
I've been reading a book called Blink. And Blink, maybe it's the same thing, Blink. And it's about the instantaneous nature of making decisions. And it's very interesting in reading all these sort of case studies from different sectors of life about people making decisions and the ability to snap decision, make decisions, and think about things, right? A blink, right? What you feel, how you judge things, and how people do that, and if they're good at it or not. And I say that because it makes this point that when we interview somebody for the job, they interviewed you, you interviewed them, you were downstairs, you're not in their office, they're not in your house, right, or studio. That what this book was suggesting was that what you really needed to do is interview somebody, but then ask for their house key. And without them there, just go visit their house. Because you would learn so much about those people than the story they're trying to tell you or their portfolio shows. And again, as somebody hiring you, looking at that portfolio, it's really difficult. And again, in this time of collaboration and digital and what's real and what's not real. But the case being is that you are going to be hired because of something that you have transmitted to me to make me interested in you and not her or not him or whatever, right? So you are entering my employ that I have expectations for you. And I've seen something in your person, right? So please bring that person to work the first day, okay? Bring whatever that is, package who you are and bring that person to that job. Create a little sense of personal space, okay? Which I seldom see anymore in architectural studios. Again, your tag boards, your toss-up boards become almost like junkyards, right? But edit yourself, but bring your person there. And different people come to the studio in different ways. And we have all pin-up areas for everybody to exert personality, and some are very neutral and plain, and that's fine. You aren't required by law to bring your person there. But it's interesting over time because I'm the ultimate sort of collager and things that happen and things that come down and things that are fresh and things that are new. And I've got magnets and I got pins and I don't worry about, but bring yourself. Look at that environment with respect, but look at it critically as well. But from a positive critical evaluation of what you would like it to be and what it could be, and build relationships with other people that are your peers or your superiors, not your superiors, that's a terrible word, but other people that have been there longer. Try and create a culture of a place. Some places come with that culture. Generally the good places have it, and it's pretty special. It is a family. I mean, so when you go through something, you're there together. And hopefully the people you choose to work for, will have a good soul, and it will be an honest place, and they are doing their best, and there'll be things that complement your values. And occasionally you'll disagree, but if they're really always trying, it's that point when they really aren't trying and they really haven't become somebody that you really respect, that's probably wise for you to say goodbye. We also have a thing at my studio. For years I'd hire somebody, and we didn't have the 3-month clause. And when you're hired, you want to make it work, and the guy that hires you or the gal that hires you wants to make it work. They're not hiring you to fail, right? But then you get in it when there's no boundary, and all of a sudden it's 6 months and you start feeling it, or sometimes after a couple weeks you're feeling it, but there was no clause, right? So when we hire somebody now, there's the 3-month clause. You are on probation for 3 months. You will get your health insurance after 3 months. You will be officially us after 3 months. And what that does is it just doesn't give us the ability to kick somebody's ass out that we really misread and don't want to be around there, but it gives our employee a chance to say, hey, I thought this was going to be cool. I don't like it either. Or not either. I mean, sometimes they surprise you and they'll like it and you want them to be there. But that's an interesting thing to, ask for that boundary. And even when you hire in, that's another thing. Right now, do you have a trial period? For you and for me. I really want to be here. God, I want to be here. I want you to hire me. And, but do you have a trial period so that you decide that I'm not right, or do I decide that I'm not right? That's an empowering tool. It's not about you being nervous on an edge. Maybe it's trying a little hard those first 3 months, and then you do have annual reviews or whatever, right? But, it's about that sort of engagement. So, anyway, I hope that these seminars have been in some way worthwhile, added a little bit of knowledge to your lives and what you've chosen to be. I'm really, really looking forward to reading your papers. Seriously looking forward to it. Because I was a little tardy in getting the thing to you on Wednesday. You saw where the date isn't the 6th of March, but the 10th of March. And I will read them. I will send you back annotated copies of them. We will accumulate them in digital fashion, that they will be a site, and there will be a bound. That second copy that you're handing in will be nicely spiral bound. I will write a forward to it, and I will put it in the library at the school as evidence of this work that you did and how you looked at things. So anyways, thank you for giving me an opportunity to express some ideas and have a conversation and share some things that I thought was important. And I hope that it caused me to learn a lot of things and see a lot of things, and it hopefully gave you a little bit. So it's been interesting. Thank you.